My own family kicked me out for a ring I never took, only to discover it years later lodged in the broken garbage disposal. Now they want to re-enter my life. I never thought I would be writing this, after 3 years of silence, but I feel compelled to tell my story. My own family kicked me out for a ring I never took, only to discover it years later lodged in the broken garbage disposal. Now they want to re-enter my life, but I have created a new one for myself without them in it. Will you ever forgive someone who did not think you could win when it counted most? It all began roughly 3 years ago. I was 21, living at home with my parents in our suburban Boston house and attending Bunker Hill Community College. Not exactly living the dream, but I was making it work, studying business management, working part-time at the Target down on Granite Avenue, saving what I could. My plan was simple: complete my associate's degree, transfer to UMass Boston, then, finally, move out and go get my own place. I had around $2,200 in a special account, some cash I booby-trapped in an envelope for emergencies, and the security deposit for my future apartment. I'm not sure if it's my house or my room, and it's in the basement. It's kinda small, but it was mine, you know? Had my PlayStation going, had some posters, had enough privacy that mom and dad weren't, like, always in my shit. It was not ideal, but it was normal. Then Melissa came home. My sister is 5 years older than I. Always been the golden child. Harvard grad, she now works some incredible gig at a high-end marketing firm in New York, and she's recently engaged to some investment banker guy named Chad. I know, for real Chad. She came home that spring to organize her wedding with mom, complete with all her wedding magazines and that gaudy diamond ring she could not stop showing off. And, God, she was insufferable about that ring. 3 carats, emerald cut, platinum band. She told this to every person on earth who would listen. I was keeping out of their way mostly. The wedding stuff was never my thing, and Melissa always made me feel like a loser. Little comments about my job, about still living at home, about my lack of direction. Whatever. I was used to it. We used to be closer when we were kids, building forts in the living room, watching horror movies together, but that changed as we got older and our paths diverged. Then it happened. It was a Thursday. I remember it vividly. I had just come home from work, was making a sandwich, and heard this scream from upstairs. The next thing I know, Melissa is running into the kitchen, face red, yelling that her engagement ring was gone. She'd removed it while washing her hands in the kitchen sink after making a smoothie, placed it on the counter, and now it was missing. Before I could even think about what was going on, she was finger-pointing at me, yelling that I must have taken it. Me. Her own brother. I was so surprised that I didn't even respond properly at first. Just kept saying, "What? No. Why would I do that?" But she wasn't listening. My parents sprinted inside, and instead of acting rationally, they immediately jumped into crisis mode. My mom was hugging Melissa, who was crying dramatically. She always had a way with the theater. And my dad started grilling me, with this look I'd never seen him use before. Like he already thought I was guilty. That was what hurt the most, in retrospect. There was no moment of, our son is not going to do this. Just immediate suspicion. Things escalated so fast. They wanted to search my room. I said okay, because I had nothing to hide. They ripped through everything, my drawers, under my mattress, my closet. Then my father discovered the envelope I used to stash my savings, about $2,200 in cash that I'd been socking away from my Target paychecks. Eventually money for a security deposit on an apartment. "What's this for?" he said, raising the envelope as if it were evidence in a crime drama. "Are you planning to use this to pay off some debts?" The gambling problem we weren't aware of. I attempted an explanation, but any word that I came up with felt like a lie coming out of my mouth. "It's my savings for a security deposit on an apartment. I've been saving up from my Target paychecks for months." Dad just shook his head like he didn't believe me. Meanwhile, Melissa just kept wailing about how the ring was worth more than $15,000, how devastated Chad would be, how her whole wedding was ruined. It was this big diamond thing, 3 carats, emerald cut. It should have been easy to see anywhere. My mom suggested I call the police, and that's when I really cracked. "Call them," I shouted. "I didn't take anything. Search me, search my car, whatever you want." I was so angry, so hurt that they would even think this way of me. I'd never stolen anything ever in my life. Never been in any real trouble. But suddenly I was a thief in my home. The next week was hell. Melissa extended her trip to handle the situation. My parents hardly talked to me, except to ask more accusatory questions. Did I sell it already? Who did I sell it to? And if I simply admitted what I had done and assisted them in recovering it, they would not file charges. Round and round in circles. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Continued going to work and school in a daze, wondering how my life had blown up so fast. Then came the ultimatum. My dad sat me down in the living room, my mom and Melissa on either side of him, as if some sort of family tribunal. "We can't trust you anymore," he said, his voice cold. "You're going to have to find a different place to live." I could not believe my ears. "You're kicking me out? Over something I didn't do." My voice briefly cracked in an embarrassing way, but I was past caring. "You have until Sunday to get your things," my mom said, not even glancing at me. 2 days. They were giving me 2 days to sort out my whole life. Melissa just sat there, with this expression of sad disappointment on her face, as if she were heartbroken that her little brother had grown up to be such a terrible person. After that, I do not recall much. Just going downstairs to my room and sitting on my bed and staring at the wall for hours. It felt like somebody had died. In a sense, something had. My relationship with my family, my sense of security, my understanding of who I was in their eyes. I wouldn't cry until the following night, alone in my car parked at the empty Target lot after my shift. I just sat there crying my eyes out. I couldn't even breathe, and I called the only person I could think of, my buddy Ryan from work. Thank God for Ryan. He didn't even flinch when I told him what had happened, just said, "Dude, my couch is yours for as long as you need it." Packing up my life felt surreal. What do you take when your entire world is coming apart? I took clothes, my laptop, my important documents, a couple of books, my PlayStation, petty, perhaps, but I needed something. Left behind the bed I had slept in since high school, the desk where I had studied, all the little comforts that make a space yours. My father stood at the door as I packed, like he was verifying I wasn't stealing the rest of the house when I left. No real goodbye, just mom, like, "Call when you've had time to think about what you've done. We can work this out as long as you're straight with me." Still assuming I was guilty. Still waiting for a confession that was never going to arrive, when I was fucking innocent. Ryan's apartment was shoebox small, his couch like trying to sleep on gravel, but it was shelter. Luckily, I had been smart about my finances. While I kept some cash in that envelope for emergencies and my future apartment deposit, most of my savings, another $3,400, were safely in a bank account my parents didn't know about. I had to drop a lot of my classes at Bunker Hill. I couldn't focus, couldn't afford them anymore without living at home. I kept my job at Target and began searching for something full-time. During every break, I looked for apartments on Craigslist, calculated how long my savings would endure, tried not to descend into total despair. Managed to get a room in a house with 3 other dudes in Dorchester about 2 weeks after getting booted. Not great, but cheap. The sort of place where the shower never gets really clean and someone's always eaten your leftovers from the fridge. But it was a bed, it was a door I could close, it was a place nobody looked at me like I was a criminal. Broke all ties with my family. Blocked their numbers. Couldn't bear to hear more accusations, more disappointment. Mom attempted to email a couple times, but that as well was blocked. I had 1 or 2 new email accounts I created specifically for job applications and school job searching. It was easier to just start fresh than to field the question of why I couldn't list my parents as emergency contacts anymore. The first months were the most difficult. Learning how to do it all, insurance, taxes, budgeting. There were nights when I ate only ramen for dinner and still worried I wouldn't make rent. Times I sat in laundromats at midnight because it was the only time I had between shifts. Times that I considered swallowing my pride and returning home, only to be reminded there was no home to return to. Not anymore. But humans adapt. We survive. I worked my way up to shift supervisor at Target. Got a better job at a warehouse in South Boston. The pay was good, the hours long but regular. My roommates weren't friends exactly, but we got along. I began taking online classes at Southern New Hampshire University, 1 class at a time, all I could afford. Life fell into a new sense of normal. Not the life I had imagined, but my life. Built with my own hands. Every bill I managed to pay, every small success at work or school, was evidence I could get by without them. I had to. The stress and schedule eventually became too much. About 2 months after being kicked out, I had to drop out entirely from Bunker Hill. It was just impossible to keep up with classes while working so many hours to stay afloat. But I didn't give up on education. For months later, once I had a bit more stability, I enrolled at Southern New Hampshire University for their online program, taking just one class at a time, all I could afford, but at least I could do the coursework at night after my shifts. The holidays were the worst. Thanksgiving at Ryan's parents' house, everyone too nice, me feeling like a stray they'd taken in out of pity. Christmas in my room while my roommates went home to their families. New Year's working OT because, well, it's that time of the year. The pay was decent, and I had nowhere else to be. Sometimes I would drive by our old house, slow down, and never stop. I wondered whether they'd ever thought about me, whether they'd regretted what they'd done. If only they'd found that damn ring. But mostly I tried not to think about it, period. Tried to remain focused on moving forward, one day at a time. Then 3 years later, almost from the day I'd left, an email from my dad popped up in my old account. I still checked it from time to time to catch any forgotten subscriptions or accounts. Subject line: "We found it." Just 2 lines in the email: "We found Melissa's ring. Please call me." I sat staring at those words for a long time. We found Melissa's ring. For words that proved me right after 3 years. For words that ought to have been relief, vindication. Instead, I was numb, angry, and then numb and angry at once. They found the ring, which meant it had existed all along, somewhere in the house. While they were accusing me, while they were throwing me out, while I was struggling to survive, it had been there. All that suffering, all that grief, all for nothing. I didn't call, couldn't bring myself to. Instead, I replied with a single word: "How?" The answer came quickly. The kitchen garbage disposal had been acting up for months and finally stopped working completely. When the plumber came to fix it, he found the culprit, Melissa's precious ring, wedged deep in the mechanism. The plumber said it was unusual that the disposal had worked at all with something that size stuck in it, but apparently it had gotten caught in just the right spot where it didn't completely stop the motor but created occasional problems. Over time, it had worked its way deeper into the mechanism until it finally caused a complete breakdown. For almost 3 years, that costly diamond was marooned in a malfunctioning device while my life unraveled. More emails followed. Apologies. Regrets. How sorry they were. How they'd never forgive themselves. How they wanted to make it right. My mother referred to it as the biggest mistake of our lives. My father said he failed as a father. Melissa said she wished she could take it all back. Too little? Too late? Maybe. But I wanted to hear them say it to my face. I wanted to see them recognize what they had done, the person I had become as a result. After a week of chewing it over, I agreed to meeting them. Not at the house, couldn't face that yet. We met at a Starbucks halfway between my apartment and their home. There is nothing that prepares you for what it's like to face your parents after 3 years of silence. My mom looked older. Strands of gray were running through her hair that hadn't before. My dad looked smaller somehow, less imposing than what I had come to fear as the judge of me. Melissa also came, which I hadn't anticipated. She looked as she always did, still composed, still perfect on the surface. Mom cried when she saw me. Just lost it right there in Starbucks, with people gawking. Dad repeatedly cleared his throat, blinked too much. Melissa wouldn't look me in the eye at first. We sat at a corner table, for people linked by blood and broken trust. One by one they apologized, voices trembling. Told me how they had realized the mistake as soon as they found the ring. How they'd been trying to track me down for weeks since they discovered it. How they'd driven by Ryan's old apartment, he'd moved, called Target. I'd left there about a year after moving out. They said they should have worked harder to locate me sooner. It turned out Ryan had changed his number, and they'd lost track of my friends after I'd intentionally distanced myself from everyone who knew my family. They tried reaching out through my old email accounts and social media, but I had blocked or abandoned those. Finally, they'd hired a private investigator who found me through my SNHU enrollment records after checking local colleges when other leads failed. "We want you to come home," Mom said, and reached for my hand across the table. I pulled back instinctively. Home. The words sounded strange, meaningless. I had a home, my small room in my share apartment, paid for by me, where no one ever doubted my character, my worth. "I have a home," I said, the first sentence of substance I'd spoken since taking my seat. "I've been constructing a life without you for 3 years. It's not that simple. You don't just find a ring, and then everything goes back to normal." Dad nodded as if he understood, but I don't think he did. How could he? He had never had his whole support system come crashing down around him. Never had to start from ground zero. "We know we hurt you," Melissa said, finally locking eyes with me. "I hurt you. I should have waited, and I didn't, and I was wrong. So wrong. I know you have every right to walk away, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to understand how sorry I am." She fidgeted with her wedding band. She'd married Chad a year or so after I left, my dad explained in his email updates. I wanted to forgive them right there. It was all right. We could keep going, be a family again. That's what one is supposed to do, no? Forgive family. A man's gotta eat, and blood is thicker than water and all that. But the truth is, it was not okay. Maybe it never would be. They had opted to believe the worst of me, had discarded me when I needed them the most. And whereas they'd spent 3 years in an easy life with each other, I'd done some serious struggling, alone. "I need time," I said at last. I can't just resume from where we left." They nodded, feigning lack of disappointment. We talked a little longer. They caught me up on family news. Melissa was married now, living in Connecticut. Dad had retired. Mom had taken up painting. Ordinary things, life things, that had occurred without me. I told them some things too. My promotion at work, my online classes, my trip to Maine last summer with friends. Only facts, careful, nothing too personal. Nothing that would allow them a toehold in the life I'd made without them. We ended our conversation awkwardly, with tentative plans to speak again. Mom put her arms around me, gripped too tight too long. Dad shook my hand, then pulled me into a swift embrace that felt unfamiliar. Melissa said, "I'm so sorry," over and over, like a mantra. I watched them walk together to their car, still a unit, still a family. I walked to my car by myself, as I had done everything for 3 years. Was I better for having seen them? I'm not sure. Validated? Maybe. The truth had finally been revealed. But there was no miraculous recovery, no instant reconnection. Just messy emotions and an unclear way ahead. I began therapy following that meeting. I thought I could probably use the assistance working through it all. My therapist asked questions that no one had asked me before. About the feeling of being disbelieved by the people who were supposed to believe me the most. About what family was to me at that time. About what forgiveness could be like, if I decided to give it. We discussed the fact that this incident with the ring was not an isolated incident. It was the tipping point of a family dynamic that had never supported me. How Melissa had always been the golden child, praised for her every accomplishment, while mine went unnoticed. How my parents had quietly upheld that hierarchy our entire lives. How perhaps, in some sick, twisted way, losing them had compelled me to discover strengths I hadn't known I possessed. I committed to phone calls with my mom every week. Short conversations on neutral topics. The weather, the TV shows, my classes. Nothing too deep. It was a start. But emails turned into a thing with Dad. He'd never been good at talking about feelings, but he could write about them sometimes. Said he was proud of how I'd done on my own, though he wished I hadn't had to. Said he thought about what happened every day, that he woke up each morning with that regret fresh. Melissa sent texts to which I rarely responded. Pictures of her dog, updates on her life with Chad, things from when we were children. Before it all got complicated. Before the ring, before the accusations, before the break that may never completely mend. About 4 months after that initial meeting at Starbucks, I finally agreed to meet them for dinner once a month at a restaurant, neutral ground. Now these cautious Sunday dinners served as our tentative way of reconstructing what we'd lost, although I wasn't ready to return to their house. My life was otherwise going well. Another promotion. More classes completed. A marginally nicer apartment with just one other roommate. I was creating it, constructing something stable in mind. And then came the job offer, roughly 8 months after reconnecting with my family. Management of logistics at a company in Chicago. Better pay, benefits, opportunities for advancement. Not just a job, but a real career. I'd applied on a whim, never thinking I'd get an interview, much less an offer. The prospect of moving across the country stirred up complicated feelings. But Boston was where I'd suffered, and where I'd survived. Where I'd shown I could get by without them. Chicago would be starting over again, but this time by choice, not necessity. I broke the news to my family on one of our tentative Sunday dinners, a new ritual we begun. Once a month, never their house, not yet, at some restaurant. Their reactions were entirely predictable. Mom was concerned about the distance right away. Dad asked practical questions about the company, the benefits package. Melissa said what she was hearing about Chicago's horrible winter. No one said what I could tell they were all thinking. If I moved, this delicate reconnection might not hold. The tentative bridge we were building might buckle under the weight of miles and time zones. "I think I'm going to take it," I said, gauging their faces. "It's a good opportunity. I have to think about my future." "But your future is here," Mom said, only to backtrack right away. I mean, we just got you back. You didn't find me, I said, trying to keep my voice light. I was never lost. I was building a life. You were looking for a ring. Harsh, maybe, but true. They had to understand I was not the person they had thrown out 3 years before. That kid who relied on their approval, their support, their home, he was gone. Replacing him was someone stronger, someone who knew how to be his own bedrock. We're behind whatever you decide, Dad said after an awkward pause. We just want you to be happy. I didn't know if I completely believed him, but I appreciated the effort. The position was willing to have me start in 6 weeks. Just in time to finish my life in Boston, find an apartment in Chicago, move. I immersed myself in preparations, partly to keep my mind from dwelling too much on what I was leaving behind. One evening, Melissa appeared at my apartment unannounced. Weirdly posed in my tiny, crowded living room, a fish out of water in her fancy clothes. I know why you're leaving, she said without preamble. It's because of us. Because of what we did. I shrugged and went back to packing books into a box. Sounds like a nice job opportunity. But that's not the only reason, she pressed. You're still punishing us. And I get it. I do. But escaping to Chicago won't solve anything. That made me angry. I'm not running away. I'm moving forward. There's a difference. She sat on my couch uninvited. I miss my brother, she said softly. The one who used to help me build forts in the living room. That watched dumb horror movies with me. Who I could really talk to about Mom and Dad's expectations. I remember those times too. Before I had to be compared to someone I could never be. The person I had become, the one she could believe would steal from her. That was a long time ago, I said, but the edge had left my voice. That night we spoke for hours. Talked, really talked, in a way we hadn't since we were kids. About the past, about the ring, about those 3 lost years. About her marriage, my career. About being siblings again, but different, maybe better. There was no magic solution that emerged from that conversation. No holy healing, no sorrowing forgiveness. But a few things changed in small ways. And a door that had been sealed tight cracked open. The weeks leading up to my move were a blur. Final shifts at work, farewells to friends, last appointments with my therapist who assured me we could continue to meet online. My family wanted to help with the move, and I said no. It was something I had to do alone, as I had done everything else that day. The night before I left, I drove past our old house one last time. Sat in my car across the street, eyeing the place that had been home until it wasn't. I wondered what my life might have otherwise been. If the ring had been found sooner. If I'd never been accused. If I'd taken the safe, predictable route charted for me. I wouldn't be the person I am today. I wouldn't be as strong, as independent, as sure of my own worth. Not moving to Chicago for a job I got solely on my own. Yes, the price had been steep, far too steep, no doubt, but I couldn't deny the growth that came as a result of that price. My phone buzzed with a text from my mom. Dinner tomorrow night before you leave? Please. It took me a long time to respond to that. Forgiveness is not a place, it is a process. Trust ruined takes time to rebuild, brick by unloved brick. Family is messy, the one you're born into, and the one you make for yourself. Okay, I texted back. I'll see you at Giuseppe's at 7. I had suggested the restaurant on purpose. As we had been, I was not meeting them at their house. But some boundaries still had to be respected. Tomorrow I would eat dinner with the family that had once thrown me away. I would be in Chicago next week, beginning a new chapter. The future lay ahead, unwritten but rich with possibility. Mine to mold, mine to decide. 3 years ago, I believed my life had just ended when they expelled me. I was wrong. It was just beginning.